I remember when I went to Mexico a long time ago, there was this guy, and he was trying to get us to go to a club. A friend of mine and I were in Tijuana doing a missions trip, and this guy kept saying, "Come with us, come with us." Well, there's alcohol, there's this stuff, and we're like, we're teenagers, and my buddy said, "Yo conozco Jesus," we know Jesus, and the guy said, "Oh, that's fine. My name is Jesus. You can come with me." What's up, party people? It is Brad Large back with you again. Sorry for the nerd glasses. I've been spending way too much time between work and this channel and all that kind of stuff at the computer, so you're stuck with those as I look at the screens today. And we have a yard sale going on in my neighborhood, so that's kind of fun too. But so today we're going to be going over week 4, what would be week 4 in a Bible study, chapters 5 through 7. Obviously, this is self-paced, so it's week whatever you want. But this is about Jesus' ministry kicking off, like his very first big speaking engagement in the Gospels. And so this is the first discourse, a major teaching in Matthew, and it covers the Beatitudes and Christianity 101, really. And so we're going to go through some different sections over the next couple videos. Section 1 is the countercultural kingdom. Section 2, kingdom obedience, OGs and the OT. And then section 3, a better way and a worse way. This whole idea of judge not lest you be judged is in chapter 7, and I love that passage. I think it's one of the most overused and misunderstood passages in the Bible. So we're going to go over that. But today we're going over the countercultural kingdom, and we'll be asking some questions about that. So let's jump into it. So Matthew 5 starts off, seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, so this would have been a familiar scene to a Jewish audience because this is how they learned things. This idea of him sitting down and then opening his mouth to speak is actually like this kind of thing in Jewish culture that signifies he's teaching, right? And so this is setting them up for similar to what happens in synagogues and the temple and other areas where rabbis would come out and teach people. And so when he opens his mouth and he teaches them, he starts off with a bang. He doesn't say, that you're powerful, you're rich, you're all this, you're going to, be in for a treat. He actually paints a picture of a disciple of the kingdom of heaven. And in doing so, he has some surprising characteristics coming out of his mouth, right? So what are the common denominators here for some of the things that he says? Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Like, these aren't pictures of powerful elites in society by any means. And so the things we usually see upheld as values of culture and society are really flipped on their head here. This is especially in an ancient culture where slavery and taking advantage of people and might is right and having a bigger army and all of these things were how you got your way and how you got ahead. Those things are not valued at all. And in fact, it's the people that are on the brunt end of those systems of power that are, in fact, being upheld here. And so the things we see upheld are values, they're just completely flipped upside down. Many qualities we see here that are valued are not valued or even sought by people. Who wants to mourn? Who likes the idea of being meek? Right? This doesn't come naturally to man. Like, we don't sit around thinking, I wish I was more meek. We might sit around and think, I wish I could be a better provider for my family. I wish I could be a better this and that, better at my hobbies, better at brewing beer, better at playing guitar, whatever it is. But those are about status and about competency. They're not about meekness or mourning or being merciful or pure in heart. So these things that he's going for are characteristics that he's saying the people that inherit the kingdom are developing these tendencies. It's completely countercultural. Do you see, what strikes me about this is it doesn't matter what time and culture you are, whether it's an ancient culture or today's culture. it's still the same battle. Culture values things that are completely opposite of the kingdom, and many of them are screaming at you from the Beatitudes here. Like, they just shout at you. They stand out so much because we're such a pleasure-filled society. Does anybody want to mourn? Do we even know how to mourn today? Like death. I read this thing that there are consultants that help people with funerals. There are consultants for how to grieve people now. And this used to be a thing, but at the same time, we're not taking kids to funerals because we're scared we're going to traumatize them. We're not taking kids to see their grandparents be buried in the ground. We're not taking kids to the hospital to see sick grandparents. We're also seeing kids grow up and not know how to deal with death, not know how to deal with this gracefully and with dignity. It's interesting to me because the practical applications of this are there as well. But right there, it flies in the face of all secular culture, all normal worldly standards. We're seeing Jesus attack the root of the problem here, which is that instead of developing good humans and good qualities for people to have that would make the world a better place, we often cultivate things that keep us in the rat race, keep us going on this treadmill, keep us going on. And he's saying, break out of that. How do we cultivate these traits? Oftentimes it means living a different type of life, valuing the things of God and not worldly things. We prioritize the things God prioritizes, and then we watch the world attack us or revile us. This is spelled out as well. In the Bible, the pretty much only thing that's guaranteed if you're following Christ in the world is that you will face persecution and people will not be very happy with you. There are two things that people love to do, and that is idolize themselves. We see this I think this is one of the biggest sins, idols in the world today, is that we're idolizing ourselves. And culture is built around this idea that you can idolize yourself. And so I think that's very problematic. And the other thing that we do is these other idols that pop up, the Baals, Molechs, Mammons, right? These other idols, we give into that. In fact, for instance, one example that I think of is a big reason that people get abortions is that they're not ready to have children at this time. So what does that even mean? That means that they want more money. They want more experiences. They want more self-experience before they bring a child into the mix. Who's that worshiping? We look at that. Verses 10 through 12 say, those that are persecuted for righteousness' sake get the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter evil falsely on Jesus' account, right? On my account, is what he says. And rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. This really got me thinking. And the question that I came away from this section is, am I being persecuted? If not, why not? I'd be really interested for you to put in the comments what you think about this verse, because when I look at this, I think, okay, if I'm not being persecuted, what's actually happening? There's got to be something. So then I think, well, a lot of Christians today, they don't look that much different than their neighbor. I think a lot of people at work, if I've ever mentioned that I go to church or Christian, that I'm often shocked to find out that they do too. And this is horrible because it talks about judging. We're going to get to that section. And so I should be compassionate to this. But it's interesting to me that I remember when I went to Mexico a long time ago, there was this guy and he was trying to get us to go to a club. A friend of mine and I were in Tijuana doing a missions trip, and this guy kept saying, come with us. Well, there's alcohol, there's this stuff, and we're like, we're teenagers, and my buddy said, yo conozco Jesus, we know Jesus. And the guy said, oh, that's fine, my name is Jesus, you can come with me. And we're like, what? And he's like, yeah, Jose, Jesus, and He was like, no, I'm Jesus. You know me. A very common middle name there. It's a very common thing in Mexico to give Jesus. It's kind of like Muhammad in the Middle East. It becomes this. The culture down there is so inundated with religion, Protestant, Catholic, and I've noticed this in other areas as well, that these people, it's cultural. But this guy is talking to teenagers, trying to get them to go spend money on alcohol in Tijuana. And he's saying, I know Jesus. You know me. You know me. And in one sense, he's very true, isn't he? He's very honest in one sense. And in another, it shows that he's just completely missing it. And I think that we fall into this all the time, where we have been brought up in a Christian nation. America is a Christian nation. We are a Christian country. We have Christian values. And when we're brought up in that, we become blinded to the fact that we're swimming in cultural Christianity and we're missing the root. We're not tapped into the root. We're not tapped into the true vine. And it comes out. Back to this idea of persecution. If you're not being persecuted, I would challenge you why you're not being persecuted. Is it because you don't look like Jesus? Is it because you don't even look like a beginner Christian? Is it because you are looking just like the culture around you? And if so, is the culture around you really that great? So another reason that I see a lot of Christians not be persecuted, and I know that that's like, I want to make, maybe I'll make that one my first shirt I make, is persecute me, right? But this idea is that a lot of Christians have their beliefs, and that they know their beliefs, they know them inside and out, and their lives look completely different, and they don't talk about it at work. They don't talk about it with people that aren't Christians. They're not being a light. The next section is about salt and light and how we're to influence the world. And maybe a reason that you're not being persecuted is that you don't run into people that are willing to persecute you. You don't live outwardly, visibly different. And maybe internally, and maybe you're studying your Bible every day and you're going to church, or maybe you work at a church. Maybe you work in these areas and you're just not surrounded by secular culture or people that you're going to butt heads with. That really got me going, because up until recently, I have not been persecuted at all for my beliefs. And I seriously thought, if I'm promised this as a believer, then what gives? What does that look like? So anyways, just something to chew on. I hope you do chew on it. And I'd love to know your thoughts on that in the comments, seriously. So is your life structured to insulate you from people who persecute you? How is your life different than the non-Christians around you? Do you see evidence of persecution of Christians in the world right now? Are you visibly, do you see evidence of Christians being persecuted? I've talked to some, especially more people that lean progressive. I've noticed, that's my anecdotal evidence, but they actually are like, Christians aren't persecuted. Christians aren't persecuted in America. I don't know about that. Ever since the whole COVID thing, it's kind of been ratcheted up. They're kind of laying their cards on the table, and any governmental system, the biggest threat that they faced was Christianity, because Christians will not bow the knee. They won't offer a pinch of incense on Caesar's altar. There have been martyrs. If people were willing to do that in the past, why are we so willing to just not say anything as we see the pressure ratcheted up on our Christian brothers and sisters? And are we taking part in that in a positive way? I really think as these culture wars are escalating, that we really need to take a look at that. I think that if you aren't being persecuted in some way for your faith right now, then I think you'd have a hard time showing you are outwardly professing gospel truth or biblical truth at this time. Because if you do that in any manner, even your best friends will engage with you in a passionate and heated way. So anyways, on to the last point. So in light of the previous point, get it? Because we're in the salt and light. You didn't know you were getting dad jokes for free, right? How do these verses of salt and light put things into perspective, though? So we talked about persecution a lot. I talked to you. Listen, but put it in the comments. But this salt and light are meant to have a purpose. They're not to be tasteless and hidden. You don't get salt for decoration. Some people do. It's cheap to color, but you see what I'm saying? You put it in your food and you eat it. And light goes somewhere that it can illuminate. We should not hide away the truth, but seek to present it to people so that it can help them. And I'm really excited that you're actually digging into the Bible and digging deeper into the Bible and potentially watching my channel to do that. That's fantastic. But the ultimate thing about that, one of the big things about that is that we fill ourselves up with the Bible. I fill myself up with God's Word. I fill myself up with Jesus. I fill myself up with God. I seek that. And why do I seek it? It's so that the world's going to bump into you and they're going to knock into you. And I was reading one of Doug Wilson's book, and he had a beautiful illustration where he says people are going to bump into you, but when they bump into you, it doesn't change what's inside you. It just lets it out. And so if the world bumps into you and anger spills out, what did you have inside you? And we have to give that to Jesus. That has been a big deal for me. Anger, lust, any of these issues that we are inundated with these days, we need to give that to Jesus. When we're filled up with His Spirit, Jesus, God, God's Word, when we're in that all the time, it starts to come out our pores. We shouldn't seek to hide it today, but we should be the salt and light to the world. And what that looks like, Christians have the answers to many of the problems people are facing today. So why are we so ashamed? Like it's become muddled over the last 50 years on some issues, especially things like homosexuality. This is a good example. Why are Christians against homosexuality? Well, I think we're seeing how that plays out in society and culture. It is a very first step in going away from God's created order. We don't really have to respect God's created order societally, right? But we went from, I don't want you to go out and bash on the gays or anything like that. I don't want you to go out there and bash people for their sexuality. That's not what I'm going for. In fact, if I don't know about it, then it shouldn't matter. But I shouldn't know about anybody's sexuality, really. That's the way I take it. It's a personal thing. Keep it personal, and then it wouldn't be an issue. But this whole idea is that we're not out there to persecute these people, but we shouldn't be broadcasting it. People were just talking about the Pride Parade and how raunchy and sexual the entire thing is. Why are we allowing that in a public space? That's not safe for kids. It's not good for kids. In fact, we have laws on the books to protect children from that sort of public display. But there are people that are actively taking their kids to these things now. And we've gone from lesbian and gay and bi, which respect gender and sex, and now we're having to explain what a man and a woman is. We don't even have an answer to what is a woman. So this whole idea is that these things are tied back to God's created order. How are these tied together? Well, it's all on a spectrum. Like the whole not understanding gender is just a further perversion of not understanding God's created order. And the mental confusion that we see around is leading to depression, anxiety, and mental disorders like we've never seen. Our youth are so anxious and all the time. Jesus actually explains that later in this section when he talks about anxiety. And he says, look, if you're anxious, that's a sin. Trust God. We have the answer to these questions, and we need to understand from a biblical perspective what those answers are so that we can be the salt and light, the light that illuminates the right path. I think a big part of this is we don't understand why the gospel is good news. We as Christians, we do get this wrong sometimes where we want to point the fingers and we want to call out sin. And I think that we actually have to start doing that in culture first, but we have to do it the right way. And the Bible tells us the right way to do that. And so not to get too ahead of myself, but too ahead of it, but I think that these issues, secular culture is wrong about diversity and being nice and all of that. They get it backwards. They think that outcomes matter. No, the application of the law matters. That's a biblical concept, that we apply the law equally. Actual equality. The fact that we are all equal in Jesus, well, that's what's funny about it, is they'll say, well, Jesus says we're all equal anyway. He says Paul says we're all equal in him. Right? So once we have that baseline morality and worldview, then we're equals in this. but that doesn't mean we don't have to call out evil in the world. Diversity, culture gets it completely backwards. True diversity is embraced by Christianity. Anybody can come to the table. Anybody can come to the table of communion, of communion with God. Anybody. It's available to everybody. Homosexuality, key issues, because most Christians even stopped calling this a sin. I say most. There are a good amount of Christians in America that even refuse to call this a sin. It has disastrous consequences, and we've talked a little bit about that, what that leads to. And it doesn't even matter whether we are looking at this consequentially or not, whether the consequences of it are completely evil or not. If God says it's a sin, is it a sin? So should we allow it in churches to go unchecked? Would you allow a wife beater or an adulterer to openly attend your services without correction? Like, if you know he's still married to somebody else and he started showing up with a new woman, would that be okay in your church? Or are we upholding the bride of Christ? Are we trying to present the bride of Christ without blemish? So Paul talked a lot about upholding the holiness of the church so that we could remain the light on the hill. If we are not exhibiting these behaviors for the world to see, we are not being a light. If we are not holding up the standards and our lives don't look better than those around us, then we're not being a light on the hill. That is what we've got there. The theological themes, being poor in spirit. I kind of struggled with what that means a little bit. So being poor in spirit. Jesus' kingdom is for people with humility who know they don't deserve it. Think about that. As we've talked about the different ways that we can call out cultural sin, and it's for people the people that know something's off and know they need help. Those are the people the kingdom is for. The poor in spirit are those who have humility and say, I can't do this on my own. I need help. When we can finally admit we're sinful, we need help, we can't do it on our own, God can do it on his own, then we win. We win by losing. That's the good news of the gospel message. That's the moment we die with Jesus and are reborn in the Spirit. When we call out to him and internalize this message that we cannot do it, God can, and we give it to him. The next one is evil nature. Jesus affirms his listeners in several ways. He actually says that they have good parental natures, humility, and good character, but he does not affirm bad conduct and character. He does not affirm bad conduct and behavior. We are evil and we fall short. Jesus gives plenty of examples here. Just when we think we're good, we're reminded that we are not good enough. In fact, in the next section, we'll go over anger and lust and these other things. And if you don't feel the weight of Jesus' words on that, I don't know what to tell you. Because the message of the next section is nobody's getting out alive. So this idea, the biggest lie of secular culture is that you are good enough, that your soul is fine, and that you are a glorious light of God who needs to be affirmed in everything you do. It's false. That's deception. Nobody is good enough. Everybody has fallen short. Look at the rise in pedophilia, grooming, transgenders, and the like. We're a society of adults playing pretend. These are all pretend issues, right? Except for pedophilia. That's a huge issue. We're a society of adults playing pretend and neglecting the very real world we live in, the very real consequences of that. And Jesus is calling that out in his preaching. And the number one thing that I take away is the proper posture of somebody attempting to live in Jesus's path, to take up their cross, is this posture of humility, of sinfulness, of grace and mercy, because they understand how much grace and mercy they are given. But when we look at the rise of this, it's the epitome of evil. To look at the world and play pretend like everything's okay and watch evil happen, I can think of nothing more wicked, nothing more awful than that. And a lot of Christians and a lot of people are not doing much about it. Not even on issues like abortion. The vast majority just sit in the pews. They might disagree, and that's good. But what's the next step? What does it look like for you to be sanctified? What does it look like for you to take that next step? As Jesus lays out the postures here, I would really challenge you to think about a way that you could take on one of these postures and try to develop it. I'd really challenge you to think about one difference you could make in the world to be salt and light in the world. There are tons of opportunities. And the last thing is, I'm going to reiterate this. Remember, you're promised persecution. And not only are you promised persecution, you're told to thank God for it, to rejoice in it. I can tell you from firsthand experience, when I'm reviled for Jesus, there is little other joy in my life when I look at the life that I am blessed with by God through His grace, through His mercy. When I look at that, and then I present myself in a way that's reviled by the secular world, I can tell you, the little taste of it that I have had is glorious. I hope that that's what you're seeking for. I will be praying for you as we go through this section. I'm trying to do these videos a little bit differently. I really appreciate you guys hanging out with me and digging deeper into the Bible. Let me know what you thought about Matthew 5 and some of the Beatitudes, salt and light. Like I said, we're going over the next section next, but let me know what you thought about that and what you've been reading in this section, and I will catch you soon. All right? Peace.